Hello, hello, everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome to the final episode of the Pathway to Healing series. I am Paula Elochi. I'm an intuitive transformation coach with directingpaths.com. So if you are new to this page, go ahead and like and follow so that you can stay up to date with all the information that we have available to you. So I am so honored and so excited to end this amazing series with the one and only Sahra of the Sacred. So she is going to be speaking on the topic of historical trauma. Now, this is something that is not talked about too often, but it's something that many of us, if not all of us, can relate to in some way, because if you came from somewhere, then there is some history behind you, right? So we're going to get on the topic of what historical trauma is, how that impacts us, and how we can begin to heal from that historical trauma. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Sahra, and I'm going to have you just explain to us. First, you can say hello to everyone, and then explain to us what is historical trauma. I'm going to give you the mic.
Awesome. Okay. So my name is Sahra. I am the CEO and founder of thesacred.com. It really doesn't matter who I am. I'm everything and nothing. But I am a mouthpiece that wants to give some education, wants to lend some language to healing, and give you something to identify what it is, the why, the how. I believe in us. It's poignant to know where, why, before we address how. Um, so I am going to explain historical trauma. Historical trauma is a term that's coined by social workers, historians, psychologists, things like that, psychiatrists, and it normally refers to the emotional harm of an individual or generation caused by a traumatic experience or event. It's most times, in essence, it's multi-generational, and it is cumulative. It reverberates across generations. So that means that it goes from great grandma to grandmother to mother to you. Historical trauma refers to the manifestation of emotions and actions that stem from this perceived trauma experienced by the specific cultural, racial, or ethnic group, because this is not something that just melanated people or African Americans experience. This is something that also Native Americans experience, that also Africans have experienced because of the impacts of slavery, to actually have people taken, ripped from their family lineage and taken into slavery. We have to take into account to the effect of that. It's related to major events that happen to the group of the oppressed or particular people because of their status as the oppressed. So this any event such as slavery, the Holocaust, forced migration, the violent colonization of Native Americans also is a really good representation of historical trauma.
So when we think of, because that's a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
When
it is.
It's a lot. So when you think of all of that and you're talking about the historical side of it, so I'm assuming that it's in some way in our DNA, right?
Pardon me?
How does that show up? How does
Ah,
historical trauma show up?
you asked the right question. So it impacts me, or descendants of historical trauma who have not directly experienced the traumatic event. So we weren't present for slavery, but exhibits and signs, depression,
Mhm.
anxiety, fixation on the trauma, low self-esteem, self-destruction, or self-destructive behavior, PTSD. That very similar to the way that war vets exhibit PTSD after they come back from combat,
Right.
like that. It actually shows up in our bodies the same way. It also predisposes us to certain conditions genetically and molecularly, such as, but not limited to, hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and PTSD is the main thing that I tend to take because it causes the brain to be in a constant state of fight or flight. And that response impairs the individual's ability to perceive love or any nurturing at all in any type of way for any prolonged period of time due to their constant fixation on they have to survive or
Yeah.
imminent fear of I'm in danger. So that's how it historically or can show up in us. For us, those are just some of the ways in which it shows up. Those are the most pertinent ones.
This is so interesting. So when you talk about the need, the inability to perceive or to accept love, right?
Yes.
You know, so that might look like a lot of different things depending on that person. You know, a lot of times, especially I'm speaking for as a Black woman, we have this attitude, you know, this perception of we're so strong, right? And we
Yeah.
can take so much. And a lot of times it's, you know, when you think of love, it's that tough love. In your opinion, what is your attitude if you talk about us the inability for, you know, to accept love? You know, how does that show up then for a mother and their child? How does that show up then for a grandmother and their child?
Oh wow. So this is something, especially mothers that parent boys. Um when we and Black men that have to raise Black boys who become Black women, men, and mothers who parent Black women, or little girls that normally are seen as Black women at 9. We are
Wow.
we are made to, or 6 or 5. It's hyper where they tend to age us.
Yes.
And they tend to age our children and
Really
perceive
wow.
them. Tend to see them as adults, even, and try them as adults in legal systems. So it leads to systemic injustice. It leads to um, things like abuse. It leads to things like anger, where the mom cannot control, or the dad cannot control their anger. And culturally, in our culture, spanking is a big thing. They spank most times. If we don't spank, we have come from homes in which our parents spanked. But there is a fine line in spanking that becomes abuse
Mhm.
that we don't talk about. So abuse, the definition of abuse would be anything that leaves a mark. And I still have belt marks from my childhood. And most of us have belt marks from our childhood, from when we disobeyed or something. And I'm thankful for my parents. I'm absolutely thankful for the way that they raised us. But this looks like us, our inability to be able to control our anger. Our inability, and then we take that out on our children. We're angry at the world um, for transposing their anger towards us. This looks like the us internalizing implicit bias, and then putting a sheet over our children and projecting that onto our children.
Wow.
The anger that we encounter from the implicit bias that we're dealt. So you can't talk about trauma. You can't talk about historical trauma without including some very key vocabulary words, such as implicit bias. You cannot, or epigenetics. You cannot do weathering. Those things, um, like DNA and molecular structures, uh, like peptides. They coincide with each other. You cannot talk about historical trauma without talking about anger, PTSD, weathering, epigenetics, all of those things, and implicit bias. So it looks like us in generations, being having to deal with being aged, our children being aged and identified as adults at 5 and 6, tried as adults in our prison systems. It looks like systemic injustice. It looks like us having to deal with assault charges. If you
Yeah.
look the Black and brown community, it looks like also tone policing. It looks like other people in community, saying, it's not what she said, it's how she said it. She said it because melanated people, or um, people of any descent, from Jamaica to the islands, Caribbean to Africa, we all have a different tone in which we reflect our passion or our words. So the word can sounds like you can't man, and man in a different Caribbean dialect, it's going to definitely sound different than us saying something in this, in as an American. So you don't see me. It looks like implicit bias. You can't hear me because you've already judged me based on what I look like. And it looks like our children not being heard because they are so busy dealing with Generation Z, dealing with our anger,
Wow.
that and our judgment, because our parents are just trying to police us generationally, culturally, into being better people, so that we don't encounter things that we're already historically predisposed to.
Wow. Wow. So, for someone who's listening in, are you saying that we can inherit trauma?
Yes, that is exactly what historical trauma is. It is inherited. When I spoke of epigenetics means that it's the underlying change to the DNA sequence in the organism. So that means it's over and above the genome. It's attached to, in addition to, anything that's historically passed. So yes, you can historically inherit trauma, and it looks heart disease. It looks like hypertension. It looks like diabetes. It looks like PTSD.
Wow. That, I mean, that's mind blowing for people because we're not only talking about, now we're getting into chronic diseases, right?
Yes, and it
So
looks
we're looking
like,
at, we've been told that, African Americans were predisposed to diabetes, and that's because of our eating, because
because
of our lifestyle.
they tell us we
But
love salt and we love sugar. That's a lie. There are studies at the Kirwan Institute. There are so many. The National Institute of Health and Science. There is another study that was done by Arlene Geronimus, University of Michigan professor, who stumbled upon this information because she was a public servant and professor of health, and she was a researcher for the University of Michigan Hospital. So most of the people that she encountered in the public and had to treat, they looked like us, Black women,
yeah,
Black men, people of other, there weren't Caucasian. So she really was hoping to find that her theory was wrong. She was only looking into it because she was just like, this can't be right. Let me do some research and some study. In her study, she found and proved that weathering is a thing. The coined term weathering and historical trauma, she added the science to what is happening to us, meaning that it even shows up at a molecular level, showing in the tests that they conducted that a Black woman, our DNA genetically looks 7.5 years older than that of a Caucasian woman. It affects us more than it affects our social economic disadvantage, affects our internal expression of stress and trauma, and it affects the way our body responds to food, the way that our body responds
wow,
what we eat. So the predisposal is not what we eat. It is, if we're born and the baby just has had milk, the baby hasn't had any salt yet.
yeah,
But
yeah,
if a hypertensive mother, if a mother that has a geriatric pregnancy, the only reason why I know some of this is because also my partner does some policy work and does a lot of work in maternal mortality, also for Black women, and so this information is widely known. But if a Black woman who has a history of hypertension has a child, that child is automatically and stressed during that pregnancy. That child is impacted by the mother's stress, because what happens is her heart rate starts to increase during labor, right? Which puts
right,
the baby in distress and causes them to have to come and deliver or break the baby free from the mother, from because or from the womb of the mother, because of her stress. So I use that definition because that is the best definition I can use to describe how it is historically passed down from us. Besides Arlene Geronimus and her study that shows that weathering causes different health vulnerabilities and increases the susceptibility for us to have different levels of infection. We're going to be more susceptible for infection, autoimmune diseases, hypertension, all of those things, diabetes, and any other metabolic condition, because of historically what we've had to endure. Trauma changes the brain.
Yes.
So every time the brain encounters a trauma, what happens is it goes, our amygdala, our prefrontal cortexes change. So the way that we respond to something, we make it, and I have to explain this. The way that trauma affects the brain is relevant because it also, the way that it affects the brain expresses itself in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So if every time we are being impacted differently because of something that happens to us, or our social economic disadvantage because of racism in America, or because of what's happening or what has happened to our great grandmother or great grandfather, and we're not healing it, we are not choosing to address it. We keep mulling over like it doesn't exist. We're not defining it. We're not challenging it. We're not doing things. It's just sitting in our body. It's just
Wow.
sitting there.
Wow.
And as it sits there, we pass it. We're passing it. Historical trauma is only something that exists because we have been stuck in PTSD for so long that our ability to make decisions is even impacted. Our ability to deal with, we're stuck in survival mode. So we can't experience love or nurturing for any long, prolonged period of time because we're so busy trying to survive or sensing any imminent danger. So we're always in the sense of danger. And when you have PTSD, what that does to your body when you're always sensing danger is, of course, your blood pressure is going to be high because you feel like you are in threat.
Yes.
So that predisposal is not predisposed. It is grandpa's lynching
Wow.
that did not get dealt with in grandpa, that got
Wow.
passed to papa, that got passed through epigenetics, because the epigenetics affects the markers of how it's expressed. So it can skip a generation, but it's still in the DNA, and it can express itself as PTSD or anger issues 2 generations later.
I am in awe. This is so much information that is not made readily available to us. And I have a question for you that I actually didn't even intend to ask, but I like to go with the flow.
Okay.
If we're talking about historical trauma, we're talking about generations that are passing down uh, molestation and things that we don't want to talk about in our family or in different parts of our community. How then can two people come together in a marriage and
Mm.
coexist? How can a person who is predisposed to historical trauma, if that's in your DNA, we're talking about the breakdown, the biology of it, how can I then find a mate if I'm experiencing this at a molecular level?
Heal. One easy one, and that's and healing is a loaded word. It is a
Yeah,
loaded. Healing looks different for every person, and depending on what your belief system is, it can look like stomping and clapping and falling out and speaking in tongues. It can look like meditation. It could look like walks through the park. It could look like hiring a therapist. And
yeah,
most in our community, that's something that we do not do. We do not encourage. We allow things to sit in our body, and we do not encourage expression, because our expression is so widely judged. So it looks like healing, making a conscious choice to embrace our own individual healing, and do that in different modalities. So you have to heal from the top up, from the bottom down, and then you have to heal internally. So there are different, you have to engage every modality of healing to achieve wholeness. You can't just, it's not just clapping and speaking in tongues that's going to get you there. It's not just meditation and chanting that's going to get you there. You have to talk. You
yes,
have to communicate. You have to write it out. Get a journal, a pen and paper. There are, you have all of the modalities of healing. You need to engage them and find a system of healing that's strategized for you. That will
Yeah.
look different. It looks like healing, and it looks like courageously healing, because that means most times culturally, healing and wholeness are not the norm. So they repeat that survival mode. They repeat that. So when you do something different, everybody's going, "Oh, what's she doing? She's crazy. She's over there in the corner in the forest hanging out, and we don't know what she's doing." And when you put a words to an action, you're saying, in defining that as your healing, it takes a lot of courage individually, as melanated people, as Black and brown people, to say, I'm going to embrace something new, and your healing and my healing may not look the same. We were so often taught that they're supposed to look the same, and it discourages us in the sect, in the culture. We discourage each other from healing because we want it to look the same.
Yeah.
We are individuals for a reason. As long as you find what works for you, we have to courageously heal.
Yeah. And I love that. And one thing that I have noticed in my journey of coaching and working with individuals is some people are not even aware that they need healing. What is your advice? Because a lot of times we say we heal for those who aren't taking the steps to do their own work.
Yeah. So yes.
What is your advice on that?
So what happens is, what I have heard and experienced is, and this is in my own healing journey, because I come from a family that, of course, my dad was in mental health. My sister is a clinical child psychologist. My partner is in social work and has done youth counseling, and we do spiritual counseling and also regular counseling together. So I come from a culture of people from both sides, where it looks religious on one side, and on the other side, it looks like more research based, more education based. So I would say that my definition of what it would look like, would be to embrace it from the standpoint of, um, I want to say the right words, but I'm not going to probably say the right words. As long as we're living, there are things that we're going to need to address and put words to heal, whether we find those words or not. What we do not realize is the inability for us to find those words is actually a symptom of PTSD. Inability of us being able to define what is going on with us, the inability for us to be able to find language, is PTSD.
Wow.
Our inability to sleep is PTSD. Our inability to control our racing thoughts is PTSD. The fact that we keep saying that, oh, he's just hyper. No, maybe it's historical trauma, and he can't control his racing thoughts, and that's also an effect of PTSD. Maybe we need, all of us in some way, shape, or form, as long as we live, need healing. That is expressed in society and religion, because there are all types of ascended masters that were sent here to provide instruction for us on how to live more fulfilled and more informed lives, and more spiritual ascended lives. They came with healing in mind.
Yeah.
They understood that all of us, healing is a universal language. It is not just a culturally melanated thing. And I am not saying that Caucasian people, other people need healing as well. But healing is something that is, we all need it. We all need it, whether Buddhist, whether Christian, whether Tao or Taoist. We all need it. Muslim. We all need it. It is something, whether you express it or not, is not the issue. It is whether you internally come to grips with it. And if you deny yourself the birthright of healing, you are denying yourself the ability to live a more fulfilled life.
Wow. And you know what? On that note, I think that is perfect to wrap this up, and because this conversation needs to continue, and this is something we talked about yesterday, and we can continue talking about. But how can someone reach out to you? If they are looking to start their healing journey, if they're looking to recognize these triggers, how can they find you?
They can find me on www.thesacred.com. You can also send an email to thesacred@gmail.com. And they can also find me on Facebook at Ma Sarah, Maasara on Facebook. We also have an Instagram, and that's at thesacred.com as well. And sacred is spelled TheseiKred. So it's not SACRED, it's SEIKRED. So and I also want to thank, the only reason why this work is possible is in the universe is aligning people like you and people like Nashay Lorick, people like Dr. L, on that Lakeisha, that I'm associated with, Black and brown women and men. We are trying to find the language and we are connecting collectively, but it's important. Nakisha Patton Handy works with children to teach them mindfulness and awareness to help towards healing historical trauma, to inspire peace. There are so many people in our community that we're connected to. So I wouldn't be able to sit here without Kajana Martin, without Benicia Jones, without people like Deneen Robinson, the policy director for the Afia Center. I wouldn't be able to sit here without those people doing the work. So I want to thank those people because the work that we do in community, Demetria Lowry, and my sound healer, Melissa Turner. I wouldn't be able, LaCondria Harper. I wouldn't be able to sit here without those.
You know what? And I admire, you are such a sweet, for anyone watching this, first off, I want to thank all of you who've been watching this for the past 14, this has been 14 weeks of pathways to healing. And I don't think it was by accident that you are wrapping up this amazing series by speaking about the molecular side of healing and how we can transform from that. And I want to thank you for taking your time and taking your energy and taking your knowledge to come on this platform and to educate people on how to recognize, trauma, and what to do once you recognize that, and then also to how to find some type of compassion for our ancestors, for our grandparents and our mothers and our fathers who were doing the best that they could. So I want to thank you for coming onto this platform and for sharing your knowledge. And this will not be the last time.
Awesome. Thank you so very much for having me. I forgot one last person, Kelly Marie.
Who was that?
She's
yes, Kelly. You can't forget Kelly.
Yes, we cannot forget Kelly. All of these, we are representation. I just want people to hear.
And the shade is on here now. I see her commenting.
Yes.
So.
Yes, she is. We all have different ways to heal. We need to humanize the expression of our healing, and we need to make it something that's normal. We need to normalize it, humanize it culturally, and that the expression of our healing journey is going to be different, but we need to normalize it and make it okay. I love everybody. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And again, I want to end this by saying I am Paula Elochi. I'm an intuitive transformation coach for Directing Paths LLC. If you've liked what you've seen, please go to the page, like and follow, because the season 2 is coming up. And we are just only going to build on what we've already learned. So I'm going to ask you to stay behind for a second, and I'm going to go ahead and end this broadcast.
Awesome. Thank you.